It's a feature of this year's conference that quite a few of our speakers are pursuing themes of social conscience and human dignity and related issues such as the environment, women's rights. Our next speaker is arguably the world's most famous and in-demand speaker on this question of human and civil rights. And just to give you a sense of the things that he's been engaged in, I'm going to read you a little bit of his recent itinerary: Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Rwanda, Afghanistan. This is Michael Ignatieff.
Good morning. I'm an old professor and I'm used to a podium, and I'm suffering from acute podium anxiety. I might as well be stark naked up here. And Arthur and Niloufar have strolled about in a professional manner, so I got a stroll. That's what you do. You stroll, but it's basically a way of managing the anxiety of feeling buck naked. I'm also anxious for another reason, which is they've done a superb job telling you about a place that I love and that I spent 2 weeks in first 2 weeks in May. I'm not sure I can add a great deal to what they've so rightly said, so I shouldn't repeat. I can confirm that we have a huge problem as the international community seeks to consolidate order in Afghanistan with warlords. I interviewed a couple of warlords up in the north of the country and noticed all the things that Arthur and Niloufar have pointed out. The rather odious way in which warlords in Afghanistan have taken off their military fatigues and are now wearing suits and ties and conduct interviews saying, war, I'm tired of war, I want peace. Our people need education, our people need housing, our people need health care. And they tell that to the New York Times, whom I was representing. They tell it to Time magazine. And then you go down 60 kilometers down the road and you discover that they're systematically starving the 800 Taliban prisoners that they took the previous November and forcing the International Committee of the Red Cross to put them on remedial feeding so they don't die. It's a little parable of one of the biggest problems of doing international assistance in this area right, the ways in which bad guys force us to take responsibility for the evils that they've done. It's a very, very complicated way in which we end up colluding with bad guys, and I saw that happen. They let the prisoners starve. We then play chicken about whether the prisoners should starve. We keep telling them, you must take responsibility for the prisoners. They don't. The prisoners begin to starve. Our conscience says we can't let this happen, so we feed them and let him off the hook. Do you see how it happens? It's a parable of the whole problem of interacting with local political authorities, international ones, and getting the gearing, the relationship between the two of them right so we can get Afghanistan back on track. The we here is suspect. I don't think it's our business or within our capabilities to get Afghanistan or any of the places that I've looked at right. I think the single thing I've learned is that we do have enormous power in the West, enormous resources, but the beginning of wisdom in a place like Afghanistan is shut up and listen. Learn about the place before coming in and so confidently pronouncing that you understand and know what the fix is. There's no toolkit. That's the second message. There's no off-the-shelf toolkit for rebuilding states that have failed. And I've been to Kosovo, I've been to Bosnia, I've been to Rwanda, I've been to Angola, I specialize in places that are bust. And what I know about places that are bust is that there's no one toolkit that'll work. There are mental attitudes that you can have that help. Respect, above all respect for the place. An attempt to learn about the place. Avoiding simple, pathetic mistakes like the Taliban invented the burqa, right? So when the Taliban are gone, the burqa should go off. The skirt should come up. You know, simple, elementary mistakes of kind of cultural ignorance and condescension towards these places. The sense that they are blank slates on which we can write whatever lines we want to write is another mistake. The sense that there's no politics there. They're all kind of slightly incompetent children. I mean, Afghanistan has an intensely complicated political culture, some of which has been referred to. Arthur showed you the Shuras. Even the warlords are complicated. This isn't the mafia, or it isn't just the mafia. You go to a school in the Shamali Plain, you ask, who put the roof back on this school? And he says, the local commander, i.e. the local warlord. These people have social functions, economic functions, welfare functions. Part of the pathology of these places, the ways in which political power, economic, social, and all the forms of power are stacked one on top of each other, and they're all in the hands of people with guns. Essentially, the trick of fixing busted societies, to the degree that there is a trick, is unstacking power so that all power doesn't come out of the barrel of a gun. The warlord problem would be a simple problem if it's just violence, extortion, and horror. Their power is also undergirded by some of their welfare functions. They protect people. That's what warlords do. It's very hard to break the relationship between warlords and the people unless you at least understand that much. Now, but there's maybe a, and let me just finish that thought off. One of the things, I'm now going to sit down in an apparently casual gesture, which is just because I feel so damn self-conscious about walking up and down. And I think better sitting down. But I am watching this thing, so. I think the thing that's interesting about all the places I've visited in the last 10 years is what they teach us about ourselves. I don't want to say that they're just a mirror in which we can engage in a kind of narcissistic encounter with ourselves, but they too teach us some very basic lessons in political science that I think are haunting and difficult for us. I mean, they teach me what a state is. What is a state? And I recall what Max Weber said, which is the great German sociologist said, a state is a monopoly over the legitimate means of violence. What do all these places that I've been to have in common? They're places where the monopoly of the legitimate means of violence have broken down. Violence, which used to be in the hands of the state, has slipped out of the control of a state and is diffused through the social tissue. Everybody's got a gun. All power comes out of the barrel of a gun. You realize what it is about living in societies like ours that is so precious and valuable. We live in societies in which power does not, by and large, come out of the barrel of a gun. That's what it means to live in a civilized place. We have a continual struggle with that. The bad guys are continually trying to break the monopoly of the state on violence. That's what the cops are doing out there, keeping the monopoly on the means of violence. In some places, that monopoly is not secure. Inner city parts of the United States, inner city parts of London, where I lived for many years. There's a constant battle in our societies to secure and hold that monopoly. I've been to places where the monopoly breaks down, and it teaches you one thing. We need to get very basic things in our society right. We need to get the rule of law to work. We need to keep the monopoly of violence in the hands of the state. We don't want people running around with guns. We don't want power to come out of the barrel of a gun. We want to unstack power. And by that I mean you don't want a society where you got to know the politician to get the car rental franchise. You got to know the guy to get the zoning variance. We want to live in a society where all power doesn't proceed by who you know, but proceeds by law, proceeds by rules, proceeds by procedures that are open and transparent. And it's all of that stuff that's bust in these societies. And when you go there, that's what you understand deeply. And when you ask, I said there's no toolkit to fix these places, but having just come back seriatim from Afghanistan and Bosnia, number one, get a secure monopoly of violence. Number two, get some rule of law. Get separation between political and judicial power. Get some judges who can do justice. Get a criminal justice system that works. that ends impunity. So people who shoot you, rape your loved ones, get punished. These are very basic things. Get property law so people can exchange property securely, hand it on to their children. Rule of law, rule of law, rule of law. The basic building blocks of the civilization that we take for granted. If there's any legitimacy or justification for intervention in these societies, it's to help them re-secure a monopoly over the means of violence and recreate rule of law in their societies. The third thing that was allured to by Niloufar and Arthur is keep the bad guys out. Bad states tend to collapse in bad neighborhoods. Afghanistan lives in one of the worst neighborhoods in the world. Everybody's screwing around in that country, including the Americans. Get the people, give a society enough international security so it can rebuild itself without outside interference, without the guns pouring into the country. That is another absolute basic almost everywhere. The other thing that we have to get right is get away from our own fantasies of imperial omnipotence. This business of fixing places that are bust is their business. It's not our business. They have to have ownership. They have to drive it. They have to make their own mistakes. They know infinitely more about these places than we ever will. That's the basic precondition. We have to find a way of intervening using all this technology, money, fancy stuff we've got, to responsibilize, forgive this horrible word, to create responsibility, help to foster and build responsibility, get people to take ownership of their own society. That's tough. One of the biggest criticisms I would have of all these international operations in which Canada plays such an important part is we go in there talking this weird talk that says we're going to build capacity. Big mantra in the aid agencies. We're going to build capacity. And what we seem to do is we confiscate it. The capacity we build is our own capacity. If you go to Kabul right now, what's disturbing is where are the computers? Where are the good offices? Where are the good salaries? Where are the good cars? They're all in the international compounds. Ordinary Afghan civil servants, and they have a civil service tradition, they have incredibly competent people. They've got Afghans like Niloufar flooding home to take charge of their country and take responsibility. The only jobs they can get are in the international sector. So we've got to think harder and more toughly about this capacity building mantra. Whose capacity are we building? We've got to build theirs, not ours. We've created an international system of interventions in which it's just a set of career opportunities for you and your children. That doesn't seem right to me. We ought to be creating opportunity for them. If we talk all this stuff about doing ourselves out of a job, we better, well, damn, do ourselves out of a job instead of creating ourselves a job. All the surface chaff of Kabul is about rents. You can pay $10,000 a month if you're an NGO. You pay your drivers $1,000. That driver will then support a family of 15, but it's sucking capacity out of Afghan society and into this international bubble zone. We've got to beat that. We've got to fix that, and I'm sure we can. And that means supporting the recurrent budget of the new Karzai administration, getting the Canadian government to do what no government likes to do, which is actually fund the budget of the Afghan government, as opposed to the budget of the UNDP, as opposed to the budget of some private NGO. Fund the Afghan budget. Hold them to strict standards of accountability. And say, it's your country, you fix it. We can give you some help, but it's your job. You've got to do it. We can do that kind of thing, but we have to be not so much tough with them, but tough with ourselves. Because international assistance is the most fantastic gravy train for us. And this is the dirty secret of international assistance. I'm a big favor of international solidarity. I just like to see some. I like to see it get to the people who need it as opposed to us. So that's an issue. The other issue that I think Niloufar and Arthur both referred to, which I saw there, is we're way behind the Afghans. Let's get out of our mind the idea that we got a bunch of slightly fratricidal children in a playground and we've separated them, put one child on that side and one side on that. We're going to rebuild the playground and sort them out. These are very sophisticated, complicated people with a complicated and tragic history. They know much more about their country than we do. And they've got competence, skills, and ability. And at the moment, they're way ahead of us. Example, it's already been cited, 1 million refugees. 1 million refugees have come back to Afghanistan since the new year at a huge rate, 10,000 a day sometimes. Now, just think about what that statistic means. You're getting on a truck in Peshawar, you've loaded all your belongings up on one of those high-sided Pakistani trucks. You're driving 6 hours up the road to Jalalabad. You don't even know whether your house is standing, right? You've taken the biggest bet a family can take, which is driving them into nowhere. And I've seen families get to nowhere, discover the house doesn't exist, discover there's mines in the field, discover the fruit trees have been ripped up, discover the irrigation dike at the bottom of the garden is gone, and they're still staying there, right? Now, you have to be made of stone not to be moved by that, right? But they're way ahead of the international community. The international community is not funding this adequately. You think that the international community has stumped up enough money to make this happen. In fact, what's happening, the international community is hanging back. The Afghans are way ahead. The UNICEF, UNDP, UNHCR are not adequately funded by the big donor countries like Canada. Bear in mind, when you start criticizing the United States, some of the worst foreign aid numbers in any OECD country are your own country, Canada. It's a scandal. This is a rich G8 country. If we're this rich, we got to get those numbers from 0.34, whatever the hell they are, up to 1% of GDP. It's not rocket science. It's not hard. And I can tell you a dozen people who could spend it really well. But if you're asking what can we do, it means political pressure to say, we can't as a country walk around saying we're good guys. We invented peacekeeping. The world loves us because we're not Americans. If you want to be a great country, you have to pay for it. You have to pay for it. I've said it's not up to us, it's up to them. But to the degree that we make promises to Afghans, for God's sake, let's keep them, okay? On the military side, you can't spend your time criticizing the Americans for doing what they're doing in there if you don't spend enough money on your national defense to create a combat-capable military force. The Americans aren't going to listen to us for 5 seconds, as Axworthy discovered, by giving them little lectures about being nicer. They respect people who can deliver combat-capable troops to do the dirty work that only they at the moment can do. These are the kind of choices a country has to make. We have to put our money where our mouth is. And then I'm telling you, because I've been there and the previous speakers have said it too, give the Afghans the tools, I'm sorry to echo Winston Churchill, and they will definitely do the job. The families sitting out there in the plains under tents will hook up the irrigation dikes, they will get those farms going. Don't believe that stuff about it being a desert. It has some of the richest agricultural land anywhere. Don't believe this stuff, they're all primitive tribal barbarians. It's a sophisticated culture, they're desperate for peace, they don't need a whole bunch of hand-holding, they just need the irrigation dike switched on, they need some seeds and tools to get the first crop out, they need some security on the roads, right? They need some roads. This isn't huge stuff. This isn't a big ticket item. But it's, above all, it comes back to our willingness as citizens to do some very simple things. Say, it's indecent for a country to say it's a good guy and have the horrible foreign aid numbers. And it's not credible. I know this is unpopular to say. It's not credible to want to go out and help fix the mean street countries of the world if you don't have combat-capable troops. Those are the two things we got to fix, and believe me, those guys in Afghanistan can fix the rest. Thanks for your attention.